Through cutthroat competition and self-interest, one firm has managed to survive for more than a century, and in the process, become the symbol of Wall Street.
Much admired, much hated, and the best risk managers on Wall Street.
It's clearly a culture that cultivates ruthlessness. Remember, for Goldman to be winners, there had to be losers.
In 1886, after making a small fortune from his clothing business, the Jewish immigrant Marcus Goldman decides to get into finance. He sees a need for small businesses to turn their accounts receivables into cash quickly. At the time, bank loans are harder to get for these small businesses. He will offer to buy their short-term debt at a discount and resell them later to other investors and bankers at a higher price. These short-term loans later became what's called commercial papers. Around that time, it was the beginning of the investment banking industry. Unlike commercial banks that provide more guaranteed and safe financing, firms like Goldman Sachs provide riskier financing, hence the term investment banks. 10 years later, Marcus Goldman grows his business to selling around $30 million in commercial papers per year. At the age of 60, Goldman has already surpassed the average life expectancy. And to make sure the family business thrives after he retires, he brings on his son-in-law, Samuel Sachs, as a partner. By 1896, Sachs grows the firm to have $1.6 million in capital, shared among 5 partners. But the business of issuing and trading commercial papers is quickly becoming saturated. To grow, they need to find the next big thing. By the late 19th century, it is taking companies public, aka IPOs.
If it's the first time you've issued shares, it's called an IPO, or initial public offering. So you're a private company, it's just you and a few friends own the company, but now you want to go public, you would generally go to an investment bank, talk to them about how to do it, and the investment bank would solve that problem for you by doing an underwriting.
At the time, doing IPOs belonged to more elite firms with a European heritage. As a Jewish firm, Goldman Sachs was sort of the outsider. But the Goldman Sachs partnership is determined to break into the IPO underwriting business. And they know just where to look. They're going to start by taking a Jewish company public. In 1897, Sears had a net worth of $250,000. But by 1905, it made $37 million in revenue and $2.8 million in net income. It's a perfect candidate for an IPO. But taking Sears public will be a tremendous undertaking, more than what Goldman Sachs can handle alone. Goldman Sachs decides to partner up with another up-and-coming Jewish firm, the Lehman Brothers. Together, they underwrite $30 million of common stocks and $10 million of preferred stocks for Sears. Both firms rake in an unprecedented amount of fees from this deal. As a result of their success, many companies become their clients. And by 1914, Goldman Sachs becomes a prominent investment bank on Wall Street. The senior partner, Henry Goldman, even gets invited to become a designer for the US Federal Reserve System. But IPOs are a cyclical business. After profiting millions in fees from issuing stocks and bonds, Goldman Sachs now needs to find a way to reinvest its money. The timing is flawless. The Roaring '20s is one of the greatest bull markets in the history of America.
It was a boom like we've never had. There was a belief that we were in the Emerald City.
Think about the roaring 20s. It was the go-go. Everybody was optimistic. Markets were soaring. When it's so easy for anybody to go get out a loan and then go speculate.
As an opportunist, Goldman Sachs intends to fully capitalize on it. It forms a trading corporation by putting down $1 million in capital, but immediately sells more shares to the public at 10 times the price. As a result, the trading corporation raises $93 million, and their original investment is worth almost $10 million. Today, the entity is more or less like the SPACs, Special Purpose Acquisition Corporations. As you can see, the essence of finance hasn't really changed. After making money virtually from thin air, Goldman Sachs starts more investment trusts simply because there are people in the market willing to pay for them. This is not unlike the dot-com bubble during the early 2000s or the cryptocurrency mania recently. During the roaring 20s, you can just create an investment trust out of thin air, take it public, and the market will buy it.
Day by day, we were nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land.
But nothing good lasts forever. Eventually, everything comes crashing down. That day is October 29, 1929.
Half the active manpower of the United States drifting helplessly in search of work. Marriage is off 22%. Birth rate down sharply. Suicide rate 40% higher.
The crash is the worst America has seen in its short history. And Goldman Sachs Trading Corporation is reduced almost to nothing. Hundreds of millions of dollars are evaporated. The partnership of Goldman Sachs lost $13 million of its investment. Within a year, hundreds of investment trusts go bust, taking down investors and investment banks with them. Goldman Sachs manages to survive the crash, and its clients surprisingly stayed with the firm. All thanks to one man, Sidney Weinberg. Sidney Weinberg is raised in a poor Brooklyn household. He's the third of 11 children. To support the family, he's forced to quit high school early. But even as a young man, Sidney shows a willingness to work hard and the ability to network. Started as a janitor at Goldman Sachs, he hustled his way to the very top of the company in a period of 15 years.
He had a tremendous capacity for connectivity with other people. It was impossible to not like being with Sidney Weinberg.
With his ability to make friends in high places, Weinberg single-handedly brings about the majority of the investment banking business to Goldman Sachs, including taking General Electric public. Even after the collapse of Goldman Sachs Trading Group, Sidney's clients still decide to stay with the firm. The successful comeback of Goldman Sachs makes Sidney Weinberg hungrier than ever. He now attempts to do something impossible. He's going to take Ford Motors public. Ford Motors is a giant car manufacturing company started by revolutionary entrepreneur Henry Ford.
Ford always thought in the sense of consumerism, how one could sell a vehicle at its cheapest. You know, sometimes populists in politics talk about a chicken in every pot. Henry Ford wanted a car in every driveway.
By 1956, Ford is the second largest car maker in America. Its IPO will make any investment bank a fortune.
Henry Ford, he never trusted Wall Street. He thought Wall Street was gambling and that it was to rip off the folks.
Even J.P. Morgan Jr. has failed to take Ford public at one point.
Henry Ford was a great man, but not a good man. And, was really a devout anti-Semite. So we can never mistake greatness in business for being a great person.
But it has been 9 years since Henry Ford died. His grandson, Henry Ford II, is a vastly different man. To Sidney Weinberg, this is his chance to cash in.
Big breakthrough breakthrough came in the 1950s when Goldman was allowed to underwrite the IPO of Ford Motor Company, given that Henry Ford was considered anti-Semitic. It was sort of a sea change on Wall Street.
As profit rolls in, Goldman Sachs needs to find more ways to reinvest them. As it turns out, a small trading department at Goldman Sachs has been making a killing. This department is led by a legendary trader, Gustav Levy. America is on the rise. After the Civil War, the country experiences rapid growth like never before. One industry reaps the reward of this economic prosperity more than any other: Wall Street. Goldman Sachs, a prominent investment bank, capitalized on the expansion of American businesses by taking them public, and in the process, making itself rich and powerful. After the IPO of GE and Ford Motors, Goldman Sachs becomes one of the most profitable investment banks on Wall Street. But to them, it's never enough.
They don't think in terms of money. They think in terms of winning. Now, naturally, if you win big in business, money follows. But that shouldn't be your objective. Your objective should be to win. To win all the time. Not sometimes, every time.
While Weinberg brings in a steady stream of investment banking deals, one Goldman Sachs trader has struck gold with a trading strategy called block trading. His name is Gus Levy. Born in a middle-class household in May 1910 in New Orleans, Levy dreamed of making the big bucks in New York. Through calculated risk-taking, by the time Levy turns 30, he's already a millionaire and a well-respected partner at Goldman Sachs. His specialty is block trading, a form of arbitrage. Levy learns that because the market can react unpredictably when the investor sells a large block of shares, he could negotiate a price with the investor privately at a discount. He then will resell the shares gradually in the market at a profit. At that time, there were many inefficiencies in the market that give rise to these arbitrage opportunities. The profit is small, but firms like Goldman Sachs had a high leverage. By the 1960s, as Sidney Weinberg is approaching his retirement, Gus Levy becomes his heir apparent. And for the first time, a trader becomes the boss at Goldman Sachs.
This guy was a shaker, maker, and doer. Gus, he was in there 7 o'clock in the morning with 2 secretaries working with him around the clock. His life was the business.
For the coming decade, Gus Levy drastically grows the trading business, making it a major source of revenue for the firm. But as Goldman Sachs issues more securities and engages in trading at a larger scale, the firm becomes even more vulnerable. For a lot of finance companies, it doesn't matter how big they get, they're often just one mistake away from a total collapse. Goldman Sachs is about to make that mistake. When the Pennsylvania Railroad acquires New York Central Railroad in 1968, it becomes the country's largest railroad company called Penn Central. While the company already has a $1.2 billion in debt, an enormous amount, it still needs more to operate. It hires Goldman Sachs to issue another $100 million of commercial papers. With a high rating, and especially seeing Goldman Sachs as their underwriter, investors pour in, eager to buy Penn Central's commercial papers, believing they're a safe investment.
The bankruptcy trustees have done their best to give good railroad service. But Penn Central has not been able to generate revenues sufficient to prevent continuing deterioration of its track and equipment, including its freight car fleet.
After the bankruptcy of Penn Central, the investors of its commercial papers are nearly wiped out. And they immediately start suing Goldman Sachs for misrepresentation. The funny thing is that the National Credit Office, a rating agency, give the debt a high rating because Goldman Sachs was its underwriter. And Goldman Sachs pushed the company to issue more debt because of high ratings. In the end, Goldman Sachs is ordered to pay 20 cents on the dollar for the investors of Penn Central's commercial papers. That's interesting, isn't it? It's almost as if Goldman Sachs knew something was going to happen beforehand. But the Penn Central scandal is just a sign of things to come for Goldman Sachs. As the economic conditions worsen in the 1970s, more securities Goldman Sachs issued are going bad. Goldman Sachs is repeatedly forced to pay millions of dollars in settlements to companies like Getty Oil and University Health Foundation. But none of this prepares Goldman Sachs for the tragedy that is about to unfold. For a while, Gus Levy seemed invincible. He's transformed Goldman Sachs from a boutique investment banking house to an elite institution that is disciplined and hungry. But in recent years, the stress may have caught up to him. He dies from a stroke during a business trip. It's a shock to everyone at the firm, as Gus Levy never even left any succession plan. But people at Goldman Sachs know there is one man who's capable for the job, and he may just be the guy to turn Goldman Sachs around. John Whitehead.